This is your Tuesday Daily Delivery. I am Michael Rand. Hope everybody's having a great day out there. We got so much to get to, as we often do on Tuesdays. Randy Johnson will join me here in just a minute, talking Gopher football. Lots of news coming out of that team lately, and of course the big win over Wisconsin just a few days ago. Andrew Krammer will join me here as well for a Vikings film review, looking at why they can't stop the run. And it goes deeper than just this last game against San Francisco, where they were injured largely on the defensive line. It's a year-long problem. It's a 2-year-long problem, and it doesn't seem like it's getting any better. That much is for sure. Keith Richotte will join me for My Least Favorite Team is My Favorite Team, back on the losing side of things and expressing himself in poetry once again. This time limericks. I don't want to spoil it, but they were pretty good. You're going to want to listen for that here in a little bit as well. So let's jump right in with the Gopher football talk right now. I'd like to welcome Randy Johnson back on Daily Delivery. Gets top billing this week. That's what happens after you cover a team that wins the Axe second time in 4 years, second time since 2003, no matter, kind of depends on how you want to frame it. But a big win for the program. Could have been even more meaningful if Nebraska had beaten Iowa the day before, although who knows how the Wisconsin game turns out if there's a little additional pressure on that game. But nonetheless, they win the game 23-13. So let's start there. Plenty of newsy stuff happened after the game, but just the game itself, what did you make of it? Kind of felt like the kind of game they wanted to play, and it was obviously the outcome they wanted too.
Yeah, it was an incredible performance by the Gophers defense. They kept Wisconsin out of the end zone. The one Wisconsin touchdown was on the tipped pass pick six early in the second quarter. And yeah, I just can't say enough about how Joe Rossi and his defense shut down Braylon Allen, 47 yards on 17 carries. He was averaging 144 in the Badgers' 7-game winning streak leading up to the game. And yeah, they just third quarter, they took the game over. Basically, just freshman quarterback Justin Wally wrestles the ball out of a receiver's hands. Kendrick Pryor gets that interception. 2 plays later, they're in the end zone, and they go from there.
Whose idea do you think it was? Was this premeditated to play jump around afterwards?
That's a good question. Props out to the games operation people. That was everybody had a good chuckle on that one, and the fans were loving it. They were jumping around, that's for sure.
Just in terms of importance, where do you put this? Because it feels like the opportunity to do more this season was there. As it turns out, losing to Illinois didn't necessarily cost them the Big Ten title, because they still would have lost to Iowa on a tiebreaker. But opportunity to do more was there. But winning this game feels like it dramatically changes the narrative of this season.
Yeah, I agree. Had they lost, they would have finished the regular season 7-5 with a 1-3 mark in November when they had a game lead in the West. Instead, now you have an 8-4 record, which is not what they might have wanted, but still decent. And you got to win over your biggest rival. If you needed to go 3-1, it turns out, in November, and beat Iowa to advance to the Big Ten title game, or have Nebraska Nebraska all over themselves.
Yes.
And but it was it makes the season look quite a bit better than the opposite.
I want to get to some bowl game scenarios in a little bit, but some news emerged not long after the game. Tanner Morgan coming back for a 6th season, not even a super senior season, a super senior season. Obviously, the rules around COVID allowing for that. And then on Monday, we also learned Zach Annexstead, who had been the backup for quite a while, is entering the transfer portal. Were you surprised by Tanner Morgan's decision, or did you think this was more likely than maybe I did?
I thought it was. There's a decent chance he was coming back. He had never played it out like it was a farewell season. He never kind of showed those type of things. And then on Saturday, he did not participate in senior day walk, or where the parents were out there greeting the players. So that was a bit of a hint. And yeah, it seems like he wants to play as much football as he can here, and we'll see how that goes. I mean, obviously, he's a quarterback who's won the Axe twice with the Gophers, which not a whole lot of them can say that. He's had some good successes, and he's had some down moments too. I figured there'd be some movement in the quarterback room with this news, and first started with Jacob Clark on Sunday. He was basically, probably like about a fourth stringer. He announces he's going into the transfer portal, and then Zach Annexstad follows today.
So what's the quarterback depth in 2022, and do we automatically assume Tanner Morgan is the starter, that he's coming back?
I don't know if you assume it, but it's kind of pointed that way. Right now, the backup likely would be Cole Krammer, who got a lot of action on the Wildcat formation. Behind him, you have he'll be a redshirt freshman, and Ethan Kalakamanis, pretty highly regarded recruits out of Illinois. They have a freshman coming in from Harrisburg, South Dakota, Jacob Knuth. He'll be starting. He'll be on scholarship. He'll be basically enrolling in January, the early period. So that's what sets up right now. There was going to be some, I guess, thinning in the room, and that's what we got.
Gotcha. Jerry Kill is coming back to coach again, and we'll see him in the start of the 2022 season, because New Mexico State, his new team, plays the Gophers to open the year. That's a little bit unusual. He's had a lot of different jobs since he left here, when we thought maybe that was the end, specifically the end of coaching for him. But good for him. If he can do it, and if he wants to do it, why not? Yeah,
it'll be interesting. That first game on September 1st, he had vowed on a radio interview that he wasn't going to step foot again in that stadium. He's going to have to maybe coach from B-Dubs across the street or something. I don't know.
Well, back then it was TCF Bank Stadium. Now it's Huntington Bank Stadium. So maybe
that's the clause that'll get him in.
Yeah, that'll. I forgot that he said that on a radio interview.
Yeah, it was on 1500 ESPN back in 2017. He was not happy with some of Mark Coyle's statements about having to change culture type of thing. Culture. That's right. I kind of forgot about all that. That's well, that'll be interesting. I kind of forgot that things weren't always happy after his departure. But good for him if he's coming back to coach. I wish him the best. Last thing, Gophers obviously aren't playing this weekend as they hope they might be in the Big Ten title game. That'll be Iowa against Michigan, but certainly a bowl game in the offing. What do we know? What are the most likely destinations at this point, do you think? Well, a lot of that depends on how many teams the Big Ten gets in the New Year's Six bowls. Right now, it would appear that you'll have Michigan in one of the playoff games, either the Cotton or the Orange. You'll have probably Ohio State in the Rose Bowl, and then the good chance that Michigan State would go to the Fiesta Bowl. Now, that's with things playing out as chalk this weekend in the conference title games. That gets a little dicier if Iowa upsets Michigan. I don't know if they get three in that New Year's Six that the Big Ten gets at. But right now, aiming with three in that group. The Gophers, their most likely destinations would be either the Las Vegas Bowl and the Music City Bowl. One of those two. They're both on December 30th. There's more of an outside chance would be the Guaranteed Rate Bowl in Phoenix. I'm thinking they don't get to one of the two Florida bowls, the Citrus or the Outback. The Outback would have been one that they might be up for. They played there in 2019. Bowl games don't want to have teams going there very in a short period of time, I guess. So it's it's just a little bit of wait and see on come Saturday night, and then Sunday morning will be the basically we'll see what happens with the playoff rankings and then where these bowls slot in.
The day before New Year's Eve in Las Vegas doesn't sound like
that one's a 9:30 game too, so that's a late one. The Music Bowls is an afternoon game. So
well, there you go. It sounds like not bad destinations if you are a Gophers fan inclined to travel. Certainly better than when they were looking at possibly going to Detroit.
Yeah, that one wasn't. They would have had if they slipped up this weekend. That Detroit might have been on the outside periphery there in play, but I think probably the furthest they could have fallen was Phoenix.
Okay, well, we'll see how that plays out. Randy Johnson, enjoyed having you on all season. Probably won't do this for a few weeks until they play again, but go get a little bit of rest, and we'll catch you up down the road. Okay.
Sounds good, Mike. Appreciate it.
Now you might notice Randy and I did not talk about Mike Sanford Jr. being let go by the Gophers. That news breaking after Randy and I talked on Monday afternoon. Offensive coordinator out, won't even be coaching in the bowl game, had been much criticized. Tanner Morgan certainly had taken steps back in 2020 and 2021 with Mike Sanford Jr. being offensive coordinator and being the primary play caller on this team. Will be interesting to see what direction they go, and how much of, now that Tanner Morgan is coming back in 2022, we will get a clearer picture of how much of the struggles in 2020 and 2021 were on him and how many were on Mike Sanford Jr.
Take a playcation to Mystic Lake for 24/7 gaming, fun restaurants and bars, and luxurious hotel rooms. And join Club M to bask in the rewards. Follow the lights to Mystic Lake, where every day is play day.
It's film review time on Daily Delivery. Andrew Krammer joins me. He's back from San Francisco. He didn't run all the way back, although I think your flight was approximately the same number of miles that San Francisco ran for on Sunday. Now, it only felt that way. They had over 200 rushing yards against the Vikings. Felt a little bit all too familiar for Vikings fans, similar to that playoff game a couple of years ago where the Vikings just could not stop the run. And when they've had some problems this year, last year, even 2019, it's been against teams that can kind of get physical with them and run the ball on them. Andrew, I guess my big question for you as we think back on the game and kind of look at the film is, what was San Francisco able to do? I know the Vikings had a lot of backups they were playing, but even the rest of this season, the Vikings haven't been a great run-stopping team. Why is that?
Yeah, I think a big part of it is we're not seeing them win these individual matchups up front in the same way they have in the past, the same way you were used to seeing Linval Joseph dominate up the middle. You think of the games where Linval, a nose tackle, was winning like NFC Defensive Player of the Week. I think that happened one or two times in his tenure here. That's just because you can dominate a center. It's much like how you see opposing nose tackles dominate Garrett Bradbury, Mason Cole. You can see how that changes a game and how that disrupts a running game and how you give up tackles for losses, negative plays, and you just abandon the running game. Well, the Niners never had to do that. And frankly, not a lot of Vikings opponents have to, because they're just not breaking through the line. They don't have the personnel, the talent. They don't have the guys to win up front right now. And so that's why on that 20-yard touchdown run to Deebo Samuel on the opener, the opening score for San Francisco, you could see George Kittle, one of the top blocking tight ends in the NFL. He doesn't need to worry about double teaming DJ Wanham or Sheldon Richardson necessarily on that end spot, because he can just go ahead and grab basically Eric Kendricks and hold him and get away with it and kind of set that edge. And that's so much easier for a team to do, an offense to do, when you don't need to worry about double teaming. It seems like half the time the Vikings, to get 2 or 3 yards in their running game, they need to double team those defensive tackles every time. And that speaks to their deficiencies in their O-line, but it also speaks to the fact that other teams are bringing better defensive linemen than what the Vikings are bringing to the table right now.
Is it anything, schematically is maybe a little bit in the weeds, but when they had their preferred lineup, even when Pierce and Tomlinson were in there, they weren't this bad as they were, against San Francisco. And San Francisco was a good running team. It's probably a perfect storm of good running team against Vikings backups. But is it anything that they do that, that isn't good at stopping the run? Are they, not playing a certain, loading up the box enough? How do we explain that?
Well, I think a big part of it is, and I don't know if it's so much the safeties and where they are and just not enough help, manpower in the running game. I don't think that's a big issue. I think what you're seeing, even before they lost Hunter, when Pierce was playing initially and they were forcing teams to the perimeter, one of the underlying issues with this team is they're not a very good tackling secondary. At least they've had a lot of ebbs and flows. You've seen Xavier Woods, you've seen Bashaw Breeland, you've seen Patrick Peterson miss tackles on the perimeter against the run. And the Debo 20-yard touchdown was a good example of that, where it wasn't a missed tackle, but Bashaw Breeland could have been a last-ditch support there as the outside corner on that play. He gets totally blocked out. A teammate runs into him. That takes out another defensive back, and there's just nobody to take down Samuel once he takes that corner. So I think they've had issues in their secondary with tackling, and one of the underrated things about that 2017 defense, and really when the Vikings were really good under Zimmer, was Rhodes, Waynes, Mackenzie Alexander when he was younger. Those guys were all super aggressive downhill perimeter exterior run defenders. And that helped force things back inside to Linval. It forced things back inside to Danielle Hunter, Everson Griffin, and those guys. And so even now they can't even necessarily force things outside. They can just get gashed up the middle sometimes. But even when they had those guys on the defensive line, they were still losing on the perimeter. And I do think some of it is they've played some of the better and more diverse NFL playbooks as far as run games. When you talk about Cleveland and San Francisco, they like to do everything. And Eric Kendricks put voice to that after the game Sunday when he said, this is a very confusing offense to go up against in terms of their running game. And when you got to think for a split second and you're already not winning the talent battle, it puts you behind the 8 ball, and it's 4 or 5 yard runs like you saw.
We were talking before we started recording about a stat called win rate. You were telling me, and I've probably peeked at this before, but I haven't looked at it as much lately, that Vikings defensively, especially in the run game, their defensive line just not ranking very high in that stat.
Yeah, and it's always a something to be skeptical about when you don't have all of the information, right? So the Vikings do a lot of, we're going to play the run first as far as holding up blocks and not necessarily shedding them right away. There's not a lot of one gap attacking going on from this Vikings defensive line. So this win rate metric by ESPN generally tracks, like, do you beat the blocker and shed them within like 2.5 seconds or 2 seconds or something like that with the play. The Vikings have a little bit of a scheme thing going on where they, by design, like to hold up blocks and free lanes for the linebackers. So they're already not trying to necessarily just get uphill right away. But at the same time, they've been better at this in the past. And it speaks to how you don't have, like I said, Pierce or Hunter. Even Everson Griffin, when he was younger, was certainly a much better run defender than he was when he was healthy and playing for them this year. And then also Dalvin Tomlinson not being there on Sunday was a huge loss. That was a huge loss when James Lynch, a second-year fourth-round pick, is making his first NFL start at that 3-tech spot. So I just think it was really a really bad storm of factors that came together for the Vikings in terms of personnel, who they were playing. And then, that win rate metric throughout the whole year has been pretty bad for them. And I do think it says a little bit about just the lack of talent they've had up front and available.
Yeah, I mean, it's, they did all this work to get their defensive line back to a point where it wasn't going to be like 2020. And now they're kind of right back where they started with 4 backups playing against San Francisco. Yeah,
and it's not looking, Mike Zimmer was kind of on the defensive today, obviously, because he's getting asked, why is this 5-6 any different than last year's? And he's trying to say, look, we're in every game. We're not getting blown out. And it's right. You're not letting Alvin Kamara set the NFL record with 6 touchdowns on Christmas Day. You're right. You're not doing that. But at the same time, this is their 3rd trip to San Francisco under Mike Zimmer. And it's the 3rd time they've given up basically 200 rushing yards. One of those games was 180 rushing yards, but every time they go out there, they get ran over, and it's always one thing or another. And this felt a lot like that 2020 defense. That's for sure.
The last thing, Andrew, the Zimmer and some of the other players were complaining. I think Zimmer the most loudly perhaps about holding penalties and things like that after a game that can sound a little bit like sour grapes. In your estimation, is there some merit to those complaints?
Yeah, and Ben Gessling actually wrote a good thing for our website at StarTribune.com about just the league trends for holding. It's about the same, meaning the NFL is just really not calling offensive holding. And so all teams have been kind of getting away with it. The issue that Mike Zimmer might have is that the Vikings lead the NFL in holding penalties. They have not been getting away with it the same way other teams are. So I'm sure that's part of what irks Mike Zimmer, but also he's a defensive guy and he wants to see these things called fairly. And the truth is the NFL is just not calling it that much anymore. And yes, there is something to that lament, but if they win the game, we're not hearing about it. It's a loser's lament, right? And there was the one on the 20-yard touchdown to Debo where Kendricks tried to sell the hold and it didn't get called. The second touchdown to Debo, Harrison Smith wanted a holding call on a wide receiver out there on the perimeter. Another one where the opponent was able to set the edge and beat him to the corner. So there was plenty of grabbing going on, but Mike Zimmer probably couldn't say with a straight face that his offensive line's not doing it as well.
Oh, for the days of the Williams wall and Antoine Winfield tackling everybody on the edge. It was they set a record one year for their run defense. It's just not the same now.
No. And it's been a precipitous drop, and one that I think people need to just put into context, because I'm seeing a lot out there, and rightfully so, about how this Vikings defense just it's not great. It's not game changing. It's the offense is what's keeping them in these games. But you just look at the numbers. They've had 6 guys miss at least 2 games on defense, and it's all their main guys. And I do think that is a legitimate excuse in the NFL when you don't have a healthy defense and you're playing in the roster is constructed like the Vikings in a way that is so top heavy. We need to believe them a little bit when back in August, Mike Zimmer was saying, I think health is one of the most important things for this 2021 season. And it just hasn't gone that way for them.
Well, if they give up 150 rushing yards and 30 points to Detroit next week, we'll have a different conversation, I think.
I think so. At that point, yeah. You can do it to San Francisco. You do that in Detroit, we might be talking more about the job security at that point.
This isn't Detroit. All right. Thanks, Andrew. Appreciate it. We'll get you next week.
Thanks a lot, Mike.
Now you heard Andrew and I talking about win rate for defensive linemen. ESPN, I looked it up. It's an ESPN analytics metric for pass rush win rate. It's how often a pass rusher can beat his block within 2.5 seconds. Or if you're talking about offensive linemen, can they sustain their block for 2.5 seconds or longer? Run stopping, it's a little bit trickier. The defender can win by beating his blocker. I'm just reading from ESPN.com. Disrupting the pocket or running lane by pushing the blocker backwards, containing the runner so that he has to adjust his running lane, or recording a tackle within 3 yards of the line of scrimmage. However you shake it out, the Vikings have been bad, and it was bad before the injuries. On the defensive side of things, Vikings pass rush win rate, 24th in the league at 38% as a team. Run stop win rate, this is as of last week, dead last in the league at 26%. So this is not just a problem of a couple guys missing a couple games. This is a systemic problem that they've had, and really going back to last year as well. So I think they might need to adjust some things to account for the fact that they have been horrendous against the run. My least favorite team is my favorite team. It is time once again. Keith Richotte joins me, not just on group text anymore. He's now on the podcast, and you probably get the unfiltered version on group text, kind of when you catch up to the game at like 9:00 at night on Sundays. There's no mincing words, but how would you like to express yourself about Sunday's 34-26 loss to San Francisco, and what was a pretty important game for both teams?
Let me just first say that I'm pretty sure that more people here are engaged with the group text than in this segment. I don't know that I'm your most popular guest on the podcast. This is more about me than about you. But to answer your question, as we've come to understand the last couple of weeks, it's easier for me to express myself through poetry.
Yes,
when it comes to football, which is really the only language of football, poetry. Mm-hmm. And this week I have decided to express myself most particularly through limerick. So the last 2 weeks it's been haiku. So is it haiku for a win and limerick for a loss, or is that just a coincidence? That's just, when you have the soul of a poet, yeah, the words come how they may. And this week it was limerick, right? I think if they tie, I think you have to do like an entire novel of like free verse. Yeah, it'll be equivalent to Elliot's The Wasteland.
Yeah,
I imagine.
Yeah, I think that would be about right. Okay, so let's hear. We're going to kind of review the Vikings 49ers game with the help of 4 limericks. I have not heard these yet. I'm a little nervous, but I'm excited too.
Okay, limerick number 1. There once was a man. No, I'm just kidding. All right, limerick number 1. I shook my head and said, man, oh man, when I saw colors red and mostly tan, I flashed back to my youth, and it made me want to puke. I forgot how much I really hate San Fran.
You rhymed youth with puke.
Yes, I did. Soul of a poet. Soul of a poet.
I'm a little... but the larger point is a good one. San Francisco, with the exception of 1987, which will always have 1987, they have not been kind generally to the Vikings in the playoffs. And even as recently as a couple of years ago, that was who ended the Vikings season in rather familiar fashion to this game with just a boatload of rushing yards. They had over 200 the other day, and I believe they had that many in that playoff game in 2019. But yeah, if it wasn't Joe Montana or primarily Steve Young, right?
They both had their shots at this team.
If it wasn't one of those guys, it's now the running game getting them.
Right. And it just, I was watching the game. I couldn't help think back to when I really started watching this team in the 80s. And that's, of course, when San Fran was the team in the league. And they just could not beat them with, of course, the one beautiful game where Anthony Carter went absolutely insane. And it felt familiar. It felt gross and disgusting and familiar. And San Fran hasn't been particularly relevant. They've had their moments. They went to the Super Bowl with Kaepernick, who the Vikings still should have signed.
And a couple of years ago.
Yeah. And so not that long. So they've had their moments of relevancy since then, but they mostly been in the background. But to see them throttle the Vikings yet again just brought back a lot of youthful, awful memories.
Yeah, I think that works for me. And it's, it goes kind of a reminder too of just the Vikings' shortcomings. And although I will say, I can see why Kyle Shanahan has wanted Kirk Cousins in that offense for a long time, because he's got the running game. He's got the defense somewhat to support it. So I say this offseason, man, Kyle Shanahan, go for it. Go all in, push those chips in and get yourself some Kirk Cousins.
Oh, please do so. And we'll speak more on that later.
Okay. Let's go. Limerick number 2 then.
Limerick number 2. Sometimes you just have to laugh. It can't be explained with a charter graph. It doesn't seem to matter at all which team has the football. They're just so bad at the end of the first half.
Yes, that you packed a lot of information into that, and it's true. What have they given up? Like 66 points now in the last 2 minutes of the first half, something ridiculous like that.
I believe that's what I've heard. Yes,
I think that's the stats. Though that's through 11. That's through 11 games, right? So that's like 6 points per game. It's like a touchdown minus an extra point, which is not guaranteed, as Greg Joseph showed us again. Yeah, it's kind of baffling, and so many games have turned at the end of that first half. I think back to the Bengals game where Cincinnati was getting shut out. Then I think they got 2 touchdowns perhaps in the last 2 minutes of the first half, and that Green Bay game almost turned. It did turn, but it turned back right at the end. There's been plenty of games where the Vikings have been seemingly in control, and then they get to the end of the first half and they can't make a stop.
Well, it speaks to their weaknesses, right? That's when we see their weaknesses magnified. That on defense, they are not very good. They don't have a lot of talent, and they have the power that they once did, or the capability on defense to stop anybody at the end of the first half. And when it comes to the offense, there's a significant dysfunction that they don't have it together enough to figure out what to do to score critical points at that critical juncture of the game. And so it just really magnifies everything that is wrong with this team.
Yeah, it really does. And, I think they've had some, like you said, some offensive shortcomings at the end of the first half that have given teams a chance to score. And when teams go into a mode where they're kind of in hurry up, it does expose them for maybe a lack of depth and a lack of talent in stopping the pass in that case. Although the 49ers drive was a little different. That was less of a 2-minute drill and more of it took forever for them to score, but they got it in there and got that touchdown at the end of the first half. And it was a game turning play because they get it tied at halftime, and then they all of a sudden they get into the locker room and they get 2 touchdowns right out of the gate. By the way, another return touchdown. I don't know if you're going to get into that with your limericks, but my goodness, that's 2 for the young man ever since he came back. Like that's in like 3 or 4 games.
Well, that's really fun and it's really exciting, and it's something we haven't had around here in a long time. But it's also wasted. Right?
Yeah, it's been in losses in both cases.
And so, getting back to the first half business, when is the last time that you felt good or comfortable or felt like the Vikings were competent with that short amount of time remaining, and that you felt like they could accomplish something?
On defense or offense?
Well, both really. But that first half where Kirk Cousins, it gets down to 5 seconds and then he just sort of flings the ball in the middle of nowhere and then throws a temper tantrum.
Yeah,
what was going on? That
was strange. What's weird is they've been on offense. They've been very good in end of game situations. It's the end of the first half that seems to be this mystery to them. And yeah, they get the long run back, and then they get the touchdown later. But you're right. They got set up at like the 40 something. So it's like, okay, you didn't think there was going to be a chance to get points, but then all of a sudden it's like, oh, they might have a chance to get some points if they can get another quick, short completion and try a long field goal. But with 5 seconds left, it turns into this wasted play, essentially, where they just don't have anything going. There wasn't enough time to. I bet if I had to guess what Cousins' problem was, is that he probably realized once he got to the line of scrimmage that he didn't have enough time to execute the play they wanted him to execute. The time was going to run out no matter what. They needed a quicker play that was going to take 3 or 4 seconds and not 5 or 6 seconds, because they only had 5 seconds left.
Well, thank goodness that he doesn't get paid enough to sort of figure that out and make something happen.
He's the quarterback. He leaves that up to the coaches. Okay, limerick number 3.
All right, number 3. Speaking of which, I get that football can be kind of hard. Even so, you should be feathered and tarred. When during the game, you have a brain drain and you line up behind your right guard.
I knew exactly where that was going as soon as I heard the second line of it, but unbelievable, right? It's basically the critical play in the game, and they end up calling timeout. So it's not like they get them. They were all discombobulated anyway. Guys were lined up in the wrong place. The receivers were going the wrong way. Cousins is trying to get them organized. By the time he gets them organized, he lines up underneath the guard. And his explanation was, I got underneath the wrong guy, lined up underneath the wrong guy. And that's, I guess you can just explain it away like that, but it's maybe does speak a little bit to his shortcomings in pressure situations. Well,
you think back to last year, right? And last year when Tom Brady looked like he was struggling with the Buccaneers and then had that one game where he thought it was 3rd down, it was really 4th down. And so it late in the game and he made the wrong play. And so mistakes do happen. They happen to the best. Tom Brady is the best, right? And so you can acknowledge that, but the word that you used is exactly right, discombobulated. They looked just totally out of sorts so many times, and he looked so out of sorts so many times during the second half of that game after he threw the pick, that it just, we questioned in the last couple of weeks, is this aggressiveness going to last? Is this ride that they're on going to last? And it just felt like he short-circuited, which happens with Kirk Cousins.
Yeah. And he's only had 3 interceptions this year, so we can't harp on that too much. But the interception he threw was all too familiar. It was they had just given up the touchdown before the first half and then a touchdown at the start of the second half. So it's 21-14, momentum starting to slip away. And he'd been much better this year in those situations at, getting them back in the game, kind of calming things down. But in this case, it felt like a very bad Kirk familiar throw where he just gets picked off on that next series, almost run back for a touchdown, almost a pick 6, but San Francisco has basically goal to go after that. And it's 28-14 before you really know it.
Right. Exactly. And so it was a bad Kirk game. Are they going to be able to recover?
I don't know. Last one.
All right. Last one. Mike Zimmer's defense is a flop. Neither the run nor the pass can they stop. Also, the offense is not always great, thanks in large part to number 8. This whole team can go chew on a dirty mop.
I wasn't sure what you're going to rhyme at the end there, but I like it. It's, it's probably sums up best how you
dirty mop.
That sounds disgusting, by the way. I wouldn't want to.
Doesn't it? That's not something that anybody would like to do.
Not pleasant. No, not pleasant.
Which is why they can go and do that.
Well, I mean, watching this team week in and week out is not entirely.
It's exactly like chewing on a dirty mop. It's
not entirely pleasant. Well, maybe watching this team isn't exactly like chewing on a mop because that's going to be unpleasant no matter what. This team is.
I don't know. A mop soaked in syrup, maybe.
That's just weird. What are you talking about?
I don't know. I'm trying to figure out a way that chewing on a mop might be pleasant to sort of engage with the analogy that sometimes it's okay to watch the Vikings and they're all right.
Okay.
I don't know. Soul of a poet.
You have the soul of a poet and you are not afraid to express yourself, this time in limerick form. And I liked it. It did sum up this week's loss pretty nicely. And I can't wait to see what you have in store next week if they manage to lose. Now, there's a lot of gloom and doom on that last segment, but I have to point out the Vikings' next 3 games against the Lions, the Steelers, and Bears. Oh, my. An opportunity for them to go on a 3-game winning streak and solidify their playoff position. Well, that'll do it for today. Hope you guys enjoyed all of the football talk. Should be some good stuff coming up. Hoping to talk to a couple of Gopher athletes for Wednesday's show. Still a little bit in the works, but should be able to bring you that on Wednesday. Some other good stuff coming up later in the week, including a visit, I believe, with Alan Horton, radio voice of the Timberwolves. That'll do it for today. Thanks for joining me. I'm Michael Rand. We'll be back at it again on Wednesday.